So, the Volga is coming back. Mancharev gave Putin the main secret of the next year. Belousov presented Putin with a unique report, and the head of state nationalized the offshore business of a rich man from the Forbes list. But first things first. The Russian industry worked perfectly well in the year 2023. Results have been achieved that no one could have imagined 12 months ago. Thus, the manufacturing industry grew by 7% at the end of the year, and the growth of investment, which ensures future development, will be about 10%. And, of course, the Minister of Industry and Trade, and more recently also Deputy Prime Minister Denis Mancharev, is directly responsible for such a result. And recently Denis Mancharev presented a report to Vladimir Putin on the results of this year's work. And after that came his big interview in the RIO News. Let's break down the main points. We'll go from the general to the particular. The figures above are made possible by the launch of large-scale industry support mechanisms in 2022. Among them we can single out preferential financing from the Industrial Development Fund. Its additional capitalization is carried out by the government on a regular basis. Cluster Investment Program, Industrial Mortgage, subsidies for neocras, Project Finance Factory, plus the NWPC mechanism was restarted. Absolutely all the above-mentioned mechanisms of industrial development have shown their effectiveness in a short period of time. The question that hangs in the air, however, is what prevented them from being implemented earlier. I don't have the answer here. Apparently there were some reasons. But let's move on to the key industries. 1. Aviation industry. Things are going pretty well here. From time to time, the media spread panic, publishing information that the delivery dates of Tu-214 or MS-21 are postponed. Yes, that's true, but there's nothing scary or surprising here. Aircraft manufacturing has its own specifics, where the main thing is to put the machines into serial production, and if there is a delay of several months, it is absolutely normal and means that it is necessary. Next year it is expected to produce 20 Superjet 106 MS-21 airplanes. Within 2 years their full import substitution will be completed, and of course with our PD-8 and PD-14 engines respectively. Work continues on Ladoga and Baikal regional airplanes. Mancharev also revealed a little secret about the wide-body Il-96-400, which made its maiden flight in November. By 2030, it is expected to be refurbished and converted to 2 engines instead of the current 4 PS-90A engines. The question now is whether its thrust will be 26, 35 or 38 tons. Next, the automobile industry. At year-end, output in all segments amounted to 700,000 units, including 480,000 passenger cars. This is objectively not much, although it is 15% higher than the previous year. The government has set an ambitious target to increase output to 1.2 million units. That is practically plus 60% to the current values. The figure is quite realistic. For example, next year Avtovaz's production is planned at the level of 500,000 cars against 360,000 this year. A new model Lada Ora, an elongated Vesta, will come to the market. The Iskra will replace the Granta in 2025 and a crossover on the Vesta platform in 2026. In addition, in the middle of next year, the Nizhny Novgorod plant will start production of a Volga-branded car. Mancharev doesn't hide the fact that it will be a story similar to Moskvich. That is, rebranding of a Chinese car followed by localization. The story is completely normal, and we don't understand the sarcasm about it. You might as well laugh at the famous Kopika, which was a copy of the Fiat. We have to start somewhere, especially since the process of import substitution of Moskvich is objectively in full swing, which will reduce prices in real terms already in the foreseeable future. Separately, it is necessary to dwell on machine tool construction. Crucial topic. In the next 3 years, an unprecedented 130 billion rubles will be allocated for the development of the industry. This is the kind of money the sector has never seen. Now the machine tool industry has a separate federal project under which 70 enterprises will be modernized and more than 170,000 machine tools and machining centers will be produced by 2030. And here we cannot do without robotization of production, the level of which is still quite low. 10 to 12 industrial robots per 10,000 workers. Early next year, a program that provides for a 30% discount on the supply of an industrial robot will go into effect. By 2030, it is planned to increase the level of robotization of production 5 times from 10 to 50 units per 10,000 workers. Competences in the field of engine building allow to create serial production of gas turbines of high capacity. The issue is directly related to technological independence. At the beginning of next year, the first startup of the already serialized GTD-110M turbine will be carried out in the Krasnodar region. The shipbuilding industry has mastered competencies in the production of cruise liners, hydrofoils, catamarans and river buses, which is important in the context of the development of domestic tourism. The process of localization of shipboard equipment is underway, including through preferential financing measures. A total of 260 civil ships are expected to be delivered by 2027 under the program of preferential leasing at the expense of FNB funds. For small and medium tonnage chemicals, production for 2023 increased by 10%. However, the dependence on imports is still serious. It is necessary to establish the production of about 500 types of products. To this end, new and expanded capacities of 150 enterprises will be created, and the contribution of the chemical industry to GDP will grow from 7 to 10 trillion rubles. We will also briefly note the production of an access train for high-speed rail. Manchurov confirmed that the trains will be produced by our enterprises, in particular by Sonara. Then the Transmarsh holding company could get involved. This kind of thing is a prime example of how projects such as high-speed rail stimulate the development of many industries, and it is rather reckless to consider them in isolation from the entire economy. In general, Russian industry has really picked up a good pace. For micro and radio electronics, the increase is about 30% in general. The main thing for next year is to maintain the current pace as much as possible. Now let's move on to the meeting between Belousov and Putin, where Belousov provided a unique report. The other day Vladimir Putin held a meeting of the Council for Strategic Development and National Projects. The first speaker was First Deputy Prime Minister Andrei Belousov, who reported on the main areas of his work. In this video we focus on the most important project under Belousov's supervision, the creation of international transportation corridors. At the meeting, the First Deputy Prime Minister outlined unique figures that were not previously known. At the moment, Russia is intensively developing 3 transportation corridors: Azov-Black Sea, North-South and Eastern. At the end of this year, the total cargo turnover in all 3 directions will be 550 million tons, which is 17% higher than the level of 2021. Here and further it is necessary to compare exactly with 2021, because last year in logistics as well as in all sectors there were abnormal processes. If we look at each direction, we get the following figures. Azov-Black Sea Corridor 220 million tons plus 24%. North-South route 19 million tons plus 38%. Eastern route 300 million tons plus 11%. Separately, of course, the potential of the Eastern Corridor is much higher. Like the North-South route, its disclosure is constrained by infrastructural limitations, which, however, are gradually being eliminated. Thus, by the end of this year, the throughput capacity of railroads will grow to 173 million tons. Up to 180 million tons in the next one. And then the third stage of the BAM and Trans-Siberian expansion will begin. Also, the diversification of logistics on all routes is also progressing at a good pace. For example, this year's container volume by rail will be 7.5 million TEU, 20-pound equivalent, up 15% from 2021. Also important is the launch of the eastern route along the north-south corridor through Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan to Iran, as well as the start of construction of the Ostara-Risht railway line, which will make the western route seamless. Belousov outlined the goal that by 2030 the cargo turnover on all 3 routes should reach at least 670 million tons. That's 1.5 times more than in 2021. And the goal, it must be said, is ambitious. However, the pace is brisk, so there is no doubt that it will be achieved. Well, another big decision has been made. Putin nationalized the offshore business of a Forbes-listed rich man. Vladimir Putin has signed a decree placing one of Russia's largest car dealers, Rolf, under external management. Now the enterprise will be managed by Rosimoshchestvo. The corporate changes have already happened. Thus, Alexei Gulyayev, already former deputy head of Rolf, was appointed CEO. His first deputy was Svetlana Vinogradova, who has headed the company until now. Thus, the top management of the company is preserved and the actual change of ownership will not affect Rolf's operating activities, which is the most important issue during the nationalization process. Until December 22, the beneficiary of the largest car dealer was the odious businessman Sergei Petrov. A few years ago, Forbes estimated his fortune at nearly $1 billion. In the best traditions of the offshore aristocracy, Petrov controlled Rolf through a Cypriot company, the Lands Limited. Of course, this is the same direction money has been flowing out of our country for years, most likely decades. Despite the fact that thanks to systemic liberals in the 90s and early 2000s, withdrawing funds from Russia became as easy a process as possible, Petrov here tried to snatch the maximum. In 2019, a criminal case was opened against him and several other Rolf top managers for illegally withdrawing 4 billion rubles to Cyprus in 2014. We will not go into details, but for the sake of petty gain Petrov went to make a knowingly false agreement on transactions between his assets. However, at that time the entrepreneur had already been living in Austria for several years. At the same time, Mr. Petrov continues his hypocritical remarks about pressure on business in Russia. For example, a few months ago, he said that the state was shooting itself in the foot in the face of its already even dilapidated institutions. Yes, apparently these very same half-collapsed institutions withstood unprecedented Western sanctions in 2022, and in 2023 not just restored the economy, but brought it to a stable growth rate. However, there is no need to pay much attention to such statements. Petrov is a typical representative of the offshore pro-Western aristocracy. For example, in 2014, he abstained from voting in favor of Crimea's reunification with Russia, and previously voted against the adoption of the Dima Yakovlev law. And you can't even call Petrov an oppositionist. This is a person who is solely interested in money, which must necessarily be taken abroad. Just bet on the wrong people a while back. Particularly amusing is the fact that in 2019 Petrov referred to the criminal case against himself as a possible attempt to raid the company. As you can see, even after all that happened, he continued to be its beneficiary for 4 years. It is only the current dramatic changes in the situation that have led to radical solutions. They occur for the following reason. At the end of February 2023, Vladimir Putin outlined the new rules of the game at a meeting with large and major businesses. The previous contract with the businessmen has ceased to be in force. Now it can be either nationally oriented entrepreneurs or offshore oligarchs. The ultimatum had an effect, and in 2023 a massive return of assets from offshore to Russia began. In the first 6 months of this year alone, significantly more companies moved to the special economic zones in Kaliningrad and Vladivostok than in the previous 5 years. And of course, these are not shell companies, but businesses with trillion-dollar assets written on them. However, the re-registration process is not straightforward. Due to legalities, it can last several years. For example, you cannot directly transfer a company from the Netherlands to Russia. This requires the use of a Cypriot registration in transit. And given the sanction stories, Western regulators are in no hurry at all to issue the necessary packages of documents. In general, the process of devshirization of the Russian economy is indeed well underway. However, it is too early to summarize the final results. After a while, it will become clear which of the largest businesses have returned assets to Russia and which have decided to keep their offshore residence. The latter will be subject to certain measures, but for a number of assets the situation is already clear. Rolf is one of those. Sergei Petrov, having lived in Austria for 7 years already, not only has no plans to return, for obvious reasons, but he will definitely not take his company out of the offshore jurisdiction. Earlier a similar story happened to such companies as Fesco, Solikamsk, Magnesium Plant, etc. Now it's come down to Rolf. I am sure we will continue to receive information about such situations on a regular basis.